If you're hunting for your next great listen, you've come to the right spot. Today, I'm going to give you my straight up best recommendations for the best audiobooks that I have listened to in at least the last 4 years. We're covering everything from literary fiction to sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and mystery and thrillers. These are the books that, to me, prove that some stories are just better heard. A great audiobook is more than just someone performing a narrative. It's someone that's embodying the role of multiple characters, or sometimes it's a full cast recording. I practice immersion reading fairly regularly. I have ADHD. So immersion reading is when you read a book and listen to an audiobook at the same time because it just helps you focus. But one of the other things that I have learned is that if I'm reading a book, like normally reading a book, I will often have to go run an errand, or I'll want to go hiking, or I have to drive to work, and I don't want to stop the story. So I'm able to switch over to the audiobook and continue. And I have found through this process that there are some stories that I just really almost prefer the audiobook, or at the very least, the audiobook just made the story come alive in a brand new way. Now, I understand that not everyone reads across genres. I love almost every genre. So I've put timestamps down below so that you could find the genre that you're most interested in. But I always like to encourage people, hey, pick up a book outside of the normal genre that you read, because I think either way it's enriching just to challenge ourselves a little bit. And again, all of these books that I am recommending aren't just good audiobooks. These are all books and stories that I really, truly just enjoyed for the merit of what they are and the stories that they tell. We're kicking things off with the smallest genre that I have on this list, literary fiction. And literary fiction is all about really the beauty of the words and the big emotions and the reality of just what it means to be human and kind of the exploration of that. I find that literary fiction is one of those that I probably read less than a lot of the other genres that I read, but there are three in particular of an audiobook form of literary fiction stories that I just think are absolutely stellar. And the first one is a book by Ann Patchett called Tom Lake. This book is a meditation on young love and married life, and it kind of explores like those thoughts that maybe we had of like, I wonder what our parents were like before we even existed or before we were even a thought. And Ann Patchett writes in a really beautiful and poetic prose anyway. It's very lyrical. But let's just cut to the chase here. 2 words: Meryl Streep. She's the narrator. Has she ever done anything bad? Honestly. Like, the story is really good on its own, but Meryl frickin' Streep. Trust me, okay? That's all I'm saying. The second audiobook I would suggest is called Beautiful Ruins. And this book is one that was recommended to me a little while ago, and I just couldn't get into it. It's a pretty big and sprawling story. It's 2 different timelines, the kind of the sun-drenched, beautiful, picturesque Italian side of it, and then more of a cynical modern-day Hollywood side of it. And it follows the story of an innkeeper and like a Hollywood starlet, and their interactions and their stories and their histories and stuff. It is pretty interesting and well crafted, but I just could not dial in. And then my friend said, you should really try the audiobook. And at that point, I wasn't really a fan of audiobooks yet. I think I had a chip on my shoulder, and I listened to it and I was just transported. And I think that's in no small part because of the narrator. I believe his name is Eduardo Ballerini or Ballatini. His Italian accents are just perfect. The way he describes everything, the way he pulls you in, there's just something about his voice that you want to keep listening to the story. And because of the way that he told it and the way that he embodied the characters and the narration, it really brought this story to life. But it is a really neat story. I think it's pretty layered and multifaceted, but it's the narrator that really takes it to a whole nother level. Finally, for this section, we have Before the Ever After by Jacqueline Woodson. And it's a short story. You can easily read it, and it's definitely worth reading if you have the tangible book. This book is so moving and beautiful and a gut punch. Just want to be really clear. If you are looking for something that is going to make you feel deep emotions and potentially cry, this is going to be that book. It follows a boy named ZJ, whose father used to be a pro football player, and his dad is showing a lot of signs of memory fatigue and personality changes and mood swings from all the head injuries that he incurred from playing football. This story is about family and loss and making the most of your time. It really is beautiful. But what the narrator does is add just an incredible level of empathy and compassion that it's near impossible to not have a deeply emotional response to this story. It's not the easiest story, but it is worth it, and it's so beautiful. And again, even if you just read it, it's worth it. But the audiobook of this is gonna make you feel some stuff. Get some tissues. All right, let's switch gears to a genre that I think is like made for audiobooks, and that's mystery and thrillers. And I'm going to start with my second favorite mystery novel of all time. My first favorite mystery novel of all time are And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. My second favorite mystery novel of all time is The Murder of Roger Ackroyd by Agatha Christie. This continues to be one of the best mysteries I've ever read. It's also one of the most well-reviewed mysteries of all time. The ending is surprising. Most people don't ever see the different twists coming. The story itself just plays out in a really interesting way. And the narrator for this particular book, I don't know, you feel like you're listening to one of those old school radio dramas. Like you want to get popcorn and sit on your sofa with a blanket and just listen to the story unfold. It's just got that production value, and the narrator that they have, who I actually think may have played Perot in the TV series back in the day. It just has that like old school audio drama feel that draws you in, and it's so good. If you've never read any of Agatha Christie, And Then There Were None and The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, top tier. That's all I can say. Over and over and over again. The second book in this genre that I would suggest is White Fire by Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. If you've watched any of my videos, you've probably already heard me say that I'm a big fan of these authors and their Pendergast series. They're like comfort reads to me. And White Fire is narrated by Renee, a last name that I'm not going to be able to pronounce. The idea of the story is basically, what if a cold case was literally buried under a blizzard? It's a gothic, snowbound thriller that's like equal parts Sherlock Holmes and The Shining. It just blends things really, really well. And again, I enjoyed reading this book just on its own. I definitely enjoyed it as an immersion read. But this is one of those books, especially in winter, which I think I'm going to do another video just on like great winter reads. This is one of those books as an audiobook. Sit next to a fire and just devour this and listen to this, because Renee, whatever his last name is, does a fantastic job. For a really dry and deadpan and darkly humorous audiobook, I suggest My Sister the Serial Killer. This is another book that as I read it, I wasn't that engaged. There was something, the language fell really flat for me personally as I was trying to engage. I couldn't get hooked in. But when I switched over to the audiobook, everything changed and the story became alive. And I think part of it is because humor is sometimes difficult to translate from book to my mind. And maybe I'm the only person that is like that. If you're like that too, please let me know in the comments so I don't feel like I'm alone in this world. So a lot of the humor was kind of lost on me, whether it was obvious or not. But once I started to be able to hear it and the kind of the vocal inflections of the narrator, who does a fantastic job, obviously this book wouldn't be on here if they didn't, it just made that humor come alive, which then in turn helped put all those story pieces into place. So if this is a book that maybe you've heard of that you're like, I don't know if I would enjoy this, or you tried to read it and it just wasn't landing, give the audiobook a chance, and I think you might be pleasantly surprised at how much you actually enjoy this book. And then for another story that's a little bit more modern and definitely cozy, I would recommend Arsenic and Adobo. This story follows Leela as she moves back home to help her aunt's struggling Filipino restaurant. And in the process, there's a nasty food critic who actually happens to be like her ex-boyfriend. He drops dead. All kinds of mystery ensues. But this is very cozy and it's funny. And if you've ever been around like a Filipino family, especially all the aunts, there's a lot of gossip and chatter and like kind of backbiting and passive aggressiveness, but then really aggressive direct talking, but then a lot of warmth and care. All of that is represented beautifully in this book in a way that is not only endearing and charming, but really kind of engaging. This book is going to make you hungry. It's a great mystery, but the conversation around the food and the descriptions of the food you're just going to be like, yeah, I need to go get some Filipino food now, which you should, because it's delicious. This is, again, though, one of those books that as I read it, it didn't necessarily land with me fully, but then when I was able to lock into the narration and hear kind of the back and forth of the aunts and the humor and how they talk about food and how they talk about the things that they don't like or they do like, everything just became so much more real. It helped me really, really dial in. But it's a great and charming book. Similar to Vera Wong's Unsolicited Guide to Murderers, which is another one that I probably could have put on this list. Another great audiobook and another great read. Just charming and fun. That one will also make you hungry though. Trust me. All right, let's move into sci-fi, which is not my typical genre, like not the one I read the most, but I am finding myself more and more enjoying sci-fi novels, particularly I think because of Christopher Rocchio's Sun Eater series that I am just devouring right now. And I can't very well do a sci-fi section without talking about a book that you've probably heard of. And if you've watched any audiobook, videos or suggestions, you're gonna hear about this book because you should. Project Hail Mary. Listen, I loved the book when I read it. Absolutely loved it. When I listened to it, I didn't think I could like this book more. And I did. And I truly, truly think I like the audiobook better than the physical book. And that's saying something because Project Hail Mary is a 5-star read for me. And I think the reason it works so well, and I'm not going to give any spoilers away, is because there are, how can I say this? There are certain linguistic aspects of the story that are hard to translate in the book that really come alive in the audiobook, and they're able to navigate that and present that in a way that's really enthralling. Beyond that, there is a lot of science talk in any Andy Weir book, but I think listening to it, it's like having the best science teacher in the world, and you're like, this is fascinating. And just the way it's presented by the narrator, you feel the mystery of the unknown as things are kind of unfolding. You definitely get the humor and the jokes. There's a ton of heart and emotion behind it as well. And again, the book, 5 stars for me, but I'm telling you, the audiobook, there's a reason it is on almost every person's list of best audiobooks of all time. Next in sci-fi, I would say World War Z, an oral history of the zombie apocalypse. I just read this year, and I ended up switching over to the audiobook because the audiobook has a full cast, and it is baller. You've got Mark Hamill, you've got Alan Alda, you've got Martin Scorsese, Rob Reiner's in there, I think Nathan Fillion is in there. It is a stacked cast, and the way in which it is presented, similar to another book that I'm going to talk about towards the end, one of my favorite horror novels that I've read in the last 3 years, definitely one of my favorite horror audiobooks. It is presented in such a way in true documentary form that even though you know it's not real, that a zombie apocalypse hasn't happened, it feels so real because the cast is just so stacked. I would say if you had an option to read World War Z or listen to it, I truly wouldn't bother reading it. I would just listen to it. And that's a weird thing for me to say, but they just did an outstanding job. I can't talk about a great sci-fi book without talking about Jurassic Park because I love it. It helped me re-fall in love with reading when I was younger, and it just has continued to do so. It's one of my favorite movies. The audiobook, 2 thumbs up. The narrator does a great job of building tension and awe. Everything about it works, even if the story is familiar to you. I won't talk too much about Jurassic Park, but it is definitely a top tier audiobook. And lastly, in sci-fi, I would suggest An I Who Have Never Known Men, which is a relatively recent story. It is very minimalist. It's dystopian, but in a very unique way, deals a lot with the questions of nature and nurture and how one tries to find hope even in constant kind of facing desolation or questions. I think it's really a big conversation on loneliness in kind of a sci-fi story, and not sci-fi story in the sense of space and lasers and rockets and all that kind of stuff, but just in a more science fiction type environment. And I think what the narrator does really, really well in this story, again, even though it's a short book that you could certainly read as well, the narrator honors silence. Go with me here, and treats silence almost like a character itself. So there are moments of like pause and breaths and beats and like elongated silence that feel so integral to the story that I think get lost when you're reading it, because our just natural proclivity is to just kind of blaze through and not necessarily really rest in those moments and let that silence speak. And the narrator does just a fantastic and incredible job. I'm probably saying fantastic way too much in this video, of allowing that silence to kind of be a character in itself. All right, from sci-fi, let's go to probably my most read genre of fantasy. And from the bat, let me just start with the granddaddy of them all, the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I'm going to include The Hobbit in this because Andy Serkis has now done a narration for all 4 of these books. It is so good. Andy Serkis played Gollum in the movies, and it is great. And he does a wonderful job of embodying all these different characters. Obviously, he embodies Gollum really well because he played him for years, and I think he's playing him again in the new trilogy that's coming out sometime next year or in the future. But the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit, just they should be there. Also, I can't do this list without also bringing up the Harry Potter series, particularly narrated by Jim Dale. Not because I think Stephen Fry does a bad job. Stephen Fry is incredibly talented, and his narration of the books is also really good. There is something about Jim Dale's voice and his narration of the story that feels, I don't know, nostalgic, or like I'm coming home to something really familiar. I love the Harry Potter books. I love Lord of the Rings books. So both of those series, you just can't go wrong. They're just done really, really well by both narrators and are so rich and wonderful. And just, I don't know, it reminds me of why I love stories so much. A more recent and definitely more violent fantasy novel that I would suggest on audiobook is In the Shadow of Gods by John Gwynne. This is a great book. This is one that I definitely did immersion reading for. And the reason is, similar to The Will of the Many, there are just names and places that I'm like, I don't know how to pronounce this. And I'm one of those people that when I see a name or word I don't know how to pronounce, if I can't find the pronunciation, it just really takes me out of the story. And In the Shadow of Gods is kind of steeped in Nordic and Viking lore and culture. And so that's really mixed up in the story a lot. And so some of the words, I'm like, I just feel like I'm saying like IKEA furniture names, and I say those wrong all the time. So I moved over to the audiobook to do immersion reading. And again, it just helped make the book come alive because I was able to really get a handle on the names and the places and all the descriptions of how they were written. For those of you that have never read John Gwynne, this is the first thing I noticed about his writing. He writes fights, battles, and action sequences probably better than any fantasy author that I've read, that I can think of. I don't know what it is about his skill. It reads so smooth, but action-packed and engaging and intriguing. And this story is pretty brutal. There's a lot in there, but it is really, really good. But as an audiobook, it's wonderful. Also for fantasy, and I guess mystery, I would say The Tainted Cup and A Drop of Corruption, which is the second book in this series. Both of those books, I had no problem reading them on their own as a book. Really great, really engaging. The humor is really on point. You just are pulled along in the story. But the narrator for both of those audiobooks are just as good as the written book. And I think it just helps elevate the story a little bit more. If you like mystery and that Sherlock Holmes feel, but you also like something that feels a little bit modern, but set in an incredibly mythic and well thought out and fantastical world, you can't go wrong with these stories and these books. But I do think the audiobooks just kind of bump it up, and they're just done really, really well. Another book that you've probably heard of because it's on everyone's, list, Dungeon Crawler Carl. It is chaos in story form. It's like Dungeons and Dragons meets The Running Man meets South Park with all kinds of other things. It's funny, it's fast-paced, it's crass, it's referred to as lit RPG. It is quite well done as an audiobook. I really wasn't enjoying reading it. There was something about the idea of leveling up like a video game in the story that as a reader, I don't know, I couldn't get my fingers on. I couldn't get my hands around it at all. The audiobook is so well done and so well produced, and the narrator is just glorious. He is so good, and the sound effects and the production value, everything about it. This is another one of those books similar to Project Hail Mary. There's a reason that it's on everyone's like top list, top tier list. It's just that good. So it is a little crass, so depending on your kind of personality, you may not like it, but as an audiobook, stellar. And then finally we arrive at probably my second most read genre, horror. I love a good horror novel, and generally speaking, I don't find horror audiobooks to be done that well. I find them all, I don't know, the production value is usually not good. The narrator feels campy a lot of the times, but there are a few that stand out among the rest that definitely elevate, or I think are even better than the reading experience of the book themselves. And the first book I want to talk about is Fantastic Land. I just talked about this book in one of my underrated horror novels that I think people should read and most people haven't. And Fantastic Land, the audiobook, is very similar to World War Z. It's done through reports and interviews, and it's got a full cast. And so because of that, and because of what the story does with those voices, it feels like you're listening to the most traumatic true crime story that you've ever heard. The story follows a hurricane that hits Florida, and people are trapped at a theme park, and no one can get to them. And basically, there's societal collapse at the theme park. People start turning on each other. It becomes like Lord of the Flies at Disney World. It's bonkers and it's crazy. But this cast is so good, and the way that they read it and the way they tell this story in the audio narrative, because you hear the utter hurt and horror and terror and pain and guilt in their voice. It's super affecting. Fantastic Land is one of those books that I don't know why more people haven't read it. I certainly don't know why many people haven't listened to it. I think it is a must read for horror fans that like things a little bit more complex and like things that are unexpected and just wild. Great as a book, but definitely I think even better as an audiobook. Then you've got Nosferatu, which is spelled like a license plate because it's a road trip story, kind of. This is hard because I don't want to give spoilers away. Nosferatu is written by Joe Hill. Really good, really interesting. This is another one that I tried to read it multiple times, and I don't DNF because I'm like physically incapable to DNF. So I just kept coming back to it because I really wanted to get into it. And I don't know what it was. I could not I could not get into it. I kept getting confused or lost, or I just distracted, whatever the case may be. And so I ended up finally switching over to the audiobook and tried immersion reading. And then I stopped immersion reading and I just listened to the audiobook because it is great. This is, I think, one of the few kind of universally acclaimed horror audiobooks that I've seen. Most people I know that listen to audiobooks, and if they do like horror, I've yet to meet a person that doesn't list Nosferatu as kind of on the top of that list. But it's a great story. Once I was able to finally get into it because of the audiobook. Another story that is on a lot of people's horror audiobook list is Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, who also wrote The Bewitching that came out earlier this year. This is a slow burn Gothic horror novel set in Mexico and kind of a aging and decaying hacienda. And this woman gets a letter from her cousin who thinks that her new English husband is trying to poison her. And the author, who I really enjoy her writing, there's something very engaging and that just pulls you in as she tells the story. This is, again, one of those books that I don't know many people that don't enjoy it. But the narrator of this book, I believe her name is Frankie Corzo. Frankie Corzo. Yeah, Frankie Corzo. Her narration is absolutely powerful in this story. She captures the wit, the sharp, confident personality of kind of the main protagonist, Nomi, I think is how you say her name. And her narration builds this like claustrophobic, oppressive, almost choking atmosphere. The way in which she describes stuff, her pacing, the way she reads it, the vocal inflection that she puts into it. Like, it is like listening to a wonderful story by a campfire that just gets increasingly more unsettling and uncomfortable. And I cannot say this enough about this particular narrator. Her pacing is perfection. That is not always the case, even with some of these other audiobooks on this list. I think Frankie Corzo, her pacing is so good that as kind of the inevitable truths begin to unravel and you begin to really understand what's going on, it's like you're on like a river that suddenly hit the rapids and there's nowhere else you can go except following the flow. And then my final audiobook recommendation is one of the few horror novels that I like that deal with body horror. Body horror is not my jam. I'm not someone who necessarily likes super graphic or violent horror stories. I like the spooky, I like the scary, I like the really thoughtful, but I cannot say enough about The Troop by Nick Cutter. This book is not for the faint of heart, whether you read it or listen to it. The story follows a Boy Scout troop who are camping on a remote island, and they come across this like emaciated man. He's thin, he's unnaturally hungry, and it turns out he is carrying a man-made virus. That's the setup. It is a very short setup in the beginning of the book, and then this book is non-stop horror, grotesque, gut-wrenching, gut-turning moments one after another. And it really spirals into completely unfiltered body horror, which, again, not normally my bag. But as a reader, I was weirdly digging it. And as an audiobook listener, it took it to a whole nother level. This audiobook is narrated by Corey Bill, and it really is just kind of relentlessly intense. He not only manages to capture the innocence of these boys who are fighting for survival and trying to figure out what to do next, but he excels at the descriptive kind of stomach churning portions as well. Another place he really shines is when it gets into the scientific descriptions and kind of the biological descriptions of what exists and what's going on. He narrates it with such calm and like steady demeanor that it makes it feel even more grotesque and more unsettling because he's so calm and steadfast, and you're like, this is blah! The way I described it to my friend, it's like, I don't know, like if you were listening to a science report from hell. I will say this: if you are a horror fan, give The Troop a read. If you are a horror fan with a strong stomach, give The Troop a listen, because it definitely lands way more viscerally when you listen to the story than when you read it. So there it is, my favorite audiobooks, at least at this point in time, that I don't think you could go wrong listening to, ranging from literary fiction to horror and everything in between. And I really do think that they prove that sometimes stories are meant to be heard, not necessarily always just read. Now I want to hear from you. What are some of the books on this list that you've listened to that you're like, absolutely 100% agree? Or what are some books that should be on this list that maybe I just haven't heard yet or listened to that you're like, bro, you're missing out. You need to listen to that. Drop that in the comments too, because we're always all looking for more suggestions. All right, as always, stay curious, read deeply, and I'll see you in the library.